Every person who has an interest both in history, especially the history of the Roman Empire, and current-day political events, will certainly at times make a comparison between those two, trying to find some similarities. And everybody who is fascinated by ancient history, especially by the Roman Empire, will certainly have noticed some parallels between events that happened back then with events that are happening right now. The Romans believed their empire would be eternal, everlasting. As do we. We believe that we have learned from our past mistakes and that now we are much smarter than people back then. Our civilization, is much more intelligent now than the old Romans, for have we not advanced so much since the old days? Mark Twain correctly realized that history does not repeat, but it rhymes, and so it is important to compare current-day political events and zeitgeist to what happened in the Roman Empire, so that we maybe can avoid the fate that the Romans had to endure, and to learn from their mistakes. And one thing especially is blatantly visible to every fan of Roman history: the eerie parallels, the eerie similarities between some modern-day socio-political currents with socio-political currents that unfolded in the late Roman Empire, when the empire began facing more and more problems. Could there be some connection between what is happening now and what happened back then? And if yes, what can we learn from it? For hundreds of years, the Roman Empire was a melting pot of many different nations, a multicultural megastate of hundreds of different tribes and many ethnicities and dozens, nay hundreds of different cults and religions, all of which were allowed to be practiced freely as long as they did not attack the authority of the emperor or go fundamentally against Roman values and customs. And for hundreds of years, this system worked very well. The Roman Empire was a state of exceptional freedom of religion and freedom of ideas, and many different deities were worshipped in often magnificent temples. From the founding of Rome until the 4th century AD, this was the common standard of the Civitas Romana, a normal part of being a Roman. But then, first slowly, very slowly, but then ever so faster, the old traditions and societal values that had existed for 1,000 years began to be questioned. A new current began to emerge which preached kindness and tolerance, friendliness and selflessness, based on the teachings of someone that had been unjustly executed many years prior. In the 160s and 250s AD, huge catastrophes befell the Roman Empire, brutal plagues that killed millions, barbarian invasions from all sides, many cities were burned, looted and sacked by invaders, millions lost their homes or died. It was a disaster, and therefore many people turned to this new faith in order to find solace from the harsh and brutal reality. By 300 AD, this cult had spread far and wide throughout the empire, reaching all corners and permeating into all walks of life. But the emperors were alarmed, for this religion was very different from the others. This one did not differentiate between religion and state, but it demanded total adherence and obedience to a code of conduct and only to one God, which was in its very essence diametrically opposed to the old traditions, rituals and practices that had been a normal part of daily life for 1,000 years. And it was questioning the power of the state, since this state and even the emperor was unimportant. They even paled in comparison to the kingdom of heaven. Hence, some emperors committed a terrible act. They persecuted this sect. And so instead of allowing it to take its course or let it run out of steam, where it would fight itself with its dozens of warring factions that wanted to tear each other to shreds, some emperors tried to eradicate it by force. And as so often, the beaten child becomes a beater himself. The 4th century would be the turning point where this hitherto quite insignificant cult would be pushed first by the Emperor Constantine, then by his sons, and later by one called Theodosius and his sons, where they would enact laws that would suddenly demonize hitherto completely normal practices and institutions. Already Constantine himself enacted the first anti-pagan laws, forbidding pagan sacrifices of animals. His son Constantius II already ordered many pagan temples closed across the Roman Empire and issued the first laws against pagan worship itself, now even threatening the penalty of death for pagan sacrifice. The Emperor Julian reversed these policies, but his rule was too short, and then Theodosius would be the next chapter where the intolerance would reach new highs. Seeing themselves backed by the state authorities and the state propaganda, Christian extremists began with the destruction of some Greco-Roman temples. Old statues were destroyed, also ancient scrolls and texts and ancient works of art, just because the authors or the artisans had been pagans. Countless scrolls were burned, angry mobs rioted in many cities, forbidding the pagans from practicing their religion, which they had done for 1,000 years before peacefully. All the while the emperors were issuing even crueler, even more restrictive, even more draconic laws. In 392, dozens of people were killed in religious clashes between Christians and pagans in Alexandria. Around 400 AD, the same happened in Carthage, where Christian zealots were directly incited to destroy pagan shrines by Augustine of Hippo, the famous church father, who actively called for the destruction of pagan shrines. Time and time again, moderate Christians or secret pagans, such as the Western Emperor Eugenius, the Magister Militum Flavius Stilicho, the short-lived Western Emperor Ioannis, the Emperor Majorian, or the Emperor Anthemius, would try to end this madness by issuing laws of tolerance towards paganism, or even plotting secret pagan revivals. But time and time again they were killed, and hence the intolerance resumed with ever greater force. Honorius, Arcadius, Theodosius II, Marcian, Leo, Justinian, they all reissued ever stricter laws, closing down the old temples for good, often giving them price to looting for the building of new churches. And of course, this was all done in the name of Christ, in the name of kindness. At the same time, the old teachings were suddenly treated as heretic. Old authors were not copied anymore, their teachings discarded if they did not adhere to the new codex of Christianity. Hence, we have very few surviving works of pagan authors, and basically no works of pagans in which they criticized Christianity survived. And all this was imposed by a ruling elite, a minority, onto a majority. Because it might surprise you that even in the year 400, the majority of people in the Western Roman Empire were still pagan. It is assumed that around 2/3 of the population in the Western Roman Empire was still pagan in that time. Yet, the other third, and even more so, the most fanatical and intolerant of them, who probably only made up a few percent, they imposed their will through ever more draconic laws onto the majority of people. At some point, pagans were not even allowed to hold state offices anymore, and possibly not even allowed to join the army, for fear of rebellious uprisings, which still happened as late as the 480s AD, such as the rebellion of Illus, which is thought by some to have been the last effort ever to revive paganism. I talked about Illus and his rebellion in this video here. And you can imagine what effect this had on the Roman Empire. Division, polarization, riots, rebellions, uprisings, chaos, destabilization. With a large part of the population now suddenly not able to partake in state matters, being effectively barred from state offices, this pagan majority, of course, was now much less motivated to defend this empire that imposed its brutal and intolerant laws onto them, which hindered them from practicing the religion of their forefathers. Many pagans were also not really motivated to join the army anymore and defend this intolerant empire. It is pretty clear that this was certainly not helpful in a time when the Roman Empire was under attack by many Germanic tribes from all sides. Needless to say, the Western Roman Empire fell only some decades after these intolerant laws were started to be passed ever more aggressively by the Western and Eastern Roman emperors. Okay, so what does this have to do with today? Before we get to that, please consider supporting this channel via Patreon or YouTube membership, because I really need your help in order to be able to continue my work on late Roman history. Without your support, I don't know how much longer I can continue this channel, because as you can imagine, the YouTube algorithm does not exactly push a niche topic such as late Roman history. Alternatively, you can help this channel by buying my merch directly here on YouTube. I have created a merch store with some cool or funny or weird late Roman merch, which you can buy directly here via YouTube in the video description. Thanks a lot. By the way, I specifically talk about early Christianity in this video, not the current one. I believe that Christianity has really become a force of mostly good over the last 1,000 years, and that the current day church is not the intolerant force that it once was in the Roman Empire. Also, it must be noted that there were many moderate Christians in the Roman Empire. I even dare say that they made up the majority of Christians. Unfortunately though, the actions of the most aggressive extremists are the actions that are most visible, and so of course over 1,500 years later, the deeds of the most extreme early Christians are unfortunately the ones that are most visible. We must keep that in mind. There were even Christian emperors such as Maiorianus or Anthemius who were very tolerant of paganism. But then again, you could also say that maybe they had secret pagan inclinations, for being openly pagan by that time was almost akin to political suicide. Nonetheless, it is very important to keep in mind that the majority of Christians did not want the destruction of pagan temples. Now, some of the sharp observers of current day political events, who at the same time are interested in history, will no doubt have noticed the frightening similarities between early Christianity and the modern woke movement. Now, what is woke even? According to a definition, it means being, quote, alert to racial prejudice and discrimination, end quote, which we can all agree on is in essence a good thing. But the same way that early Christianity got twisted by extremists into an abomination of what it was initially intended to be, namely a force of tolerance and kindness, the same way the far left fringes are basically twisting this initially good concept and turn it into an abomination of what it was initially intended to be. So of course I am talking about the loudest and most extreme form of this heavily overused term, woke. Because exactly as in the ancient times, unfortunately the most extreme people are the most visible ones. And if you are a Rome nerd like me, and chances are pretty high that you are if you are watching this video, then you might be interested in the incredible rings and other Roman accessories which the SPQR Shop is building. They make legionary rings, they make rings with different themes, they even make coin replicas, statues, pendants, attributes and terracottas. And the most incredible thing is that they handcraft every single piece. That's right, this is really high quality handcrafted material. There's really no better present for yourself or someone you know who might be a Rome fan. I put the link to their shop in the video description and into the pinned comment, and with this link you can get a 10% rebate on every purchase if you type in the rebate code Maiorianus. So go and check out their assortment, it's really quite incredible. So back to the topic at hand. Of course, the same is also true for far-right ideologies. This should be very clear. They can also be dangerous, as they can also twist history to their own ends. We unfortunately saw that very brutally about 80 years ago. I will also make a video about that in order to present a fair and complete picture of the matter at hand. So hence, in this video, I am specifically talking about the far left ideology, wherein an extremist minority imposes definitions and laws onto a majority of people who do not share these views. The same way as in the Roman Empire after the 300s, where a minority of people imposed their will onto the majority of people, the same way it seems that quite often this current-day far-left ideology is politically instrumented and then imposed onto the greater part of the population. Fascinatingly, many celebrities and politicians subscribe to this far-left view, and in some countries laws have or are being issued that remind us a bit of the era of Theodosius. Differing opinions are being censored, people who question or criticize the far-left ideology are called right-wing extremists or conspiracy theorists, in order to silence them, of course, and in order to discredit them. At the same time, an atmosphere of fear is being created in which people are afraid to even utter their real opinion, in fear of reprisals, in fear of being cancelled, in fear of losing their jobs. People are getting cancelled for having opinions that don't fit the current mainstream narrative, and are losing their jobs sometimes over mere allegations, with apparently nobody interested in checking if these allegations are even true or not. At the same time, proponents of far-left ideology tear down statues of people who now in hindsight appear evil. They retroactively apply modern standards and morals onto a completely different time, completely neglecting the historical context. All the while, these actions often don't meet reprisals of any form and are even praised by the media apparatus that, in many cases, has become very biased and a political instrument of propaganda. Sounds familiar? We cannot help but notice the similarities between these occurrences and what happened in the late Roman Empire. Of course, it is clear that we cannot compare these things one to one. We live in quite different times after all. But in my opinion, the late Roman Empire is a treasure trove of important lessons for any civilization. And the often euphemistically called triumph of Christianity was nothing less than oppression and destruction of the old in favor of building something new, even if that meant tearing down the old statues and temples. We must learn from the late Roman Empire in order not to let extremist ideologies that are being dictated by a fanatical minority onto the majority destabilize society to such a degree that history repeats in some form. We can already see the growing divide and polarization, exactly as back then. Why should a pagan defend the Western Roman Empire and its oppressive emperors that don't even allow him to worship his gods in peace? Why should someone who does not subscribe to far-left ideologies defend the country which has punished him for expressing his view in the case that it is under attack? Exactly as back in the late Roman Empire, extreme ideologies, and that includes the most extreme woke ideologies, create a huge divide in society, wherein a counter-trend is then understandably being created, diametrically opposed, which of course erodes society dangerously. And then, if an external threat should arise, such a society would be very ill prepared, as the people are divided into two opposing factions. Hence, I really do see some dangerous parallels to the late Roman Empire. But maybe it's just me. What do you think? Am I seeing things here? Parallels that don't exist? Let me know what you think in the comment section, because this is a fascinating topic. In order to avoid such a fate, open discourse must be allowed, and differing opinions must not be censored or immediately labeled as right-wing or conspiracy theories. We must learn from the mistakes of the late Roman Empire. And please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting my work on Patreon or via a YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support, since this channel does not generate a lot of revenue on its own. Seriously, this channel would not work without our amazing Patreon and YouTube members. I'm not just saying that. And I want to thank each and every one who is supporting this channel in any form. Gratias tibiago, amici. And no, I'm not a hater of Christianity. In fact, in this video in the upper right corner, I actually try to show the positive aspects of early Christianity. And in the video in the lower right corner, I talked about the heroic Christian monks who saved many Romans in the 470s. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.